Good evening, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. I'm so excited to bring you this session. We're going to talk all about the Americas and what is going on with rare disease there. And it only makes sense to have the in-house resident Little American host it. So I really hope you enjoy this. I've been buzzing about it all day, and since I've known about it. So before I get into this, I just want to take a few seconds to thank our sponsors. We could not host this showcase without them. I want to start by thanking our corporate partner Helix and our 3 gold sponsors, Pulse InfoFrame, Bionicle EMAS, and Apparito. Our silver sponsor, EUSA Pharma, and our 4 bronze sponsors, Gilead, PTC Therapeutics, Roche, and Rhythm. And if you say Rhythm and don't give a little jig, I can't do it. So I hope you enjoy that. And our supporter, the community fund has been massive for our charity. So thank you for the entire slide. We really appreciate your generosity and support. So it's time to meet the speakers. You've seen this graphic a billion times. I've posted it a billion times. So I'm joined today, or actually tonight, I'm not very good with time zones, with Andra, Heidi. We have a pre-recorded video from Durhane. We have Emerson here, we have Renata, and we have Juan. So before you get to meet their beautiful faces, you're stuck with mine, sorry. So we're gonna explore in this session 2 diverse continents and how they approach rare diseases. So we're gonna talk all things about the patient group landscape in the US, which is my former home and I love it very dearly. The research ecosystem of Brazil, access to rare disease medicines in Canada, and the role the pharmaceutical industry plays in South America. So I really hope you guys brought your passport because this is better than around the world in 80 days. We got 2 hours. So, my little slide. Okay, yes, so I took you from a macro version and now we're going to a micro version. This is basically, we're gonna open up with a pre-recorded video from Durhane to discuss access to rare disease drugs in Canada. So we're starting off in Canada and we're moving down. Andra and Heidi are gonna discuss the Rare as One program. They're part of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which just gave $13 million to 40 patient groups in America to work alongside researchers and clinicians to accelerate rare disease in their condition. And this is actually a really great segue to introduce you to the Yaya Foundation. They were actually the first recipient of one of these grants. And so you'll learn about the Rare as One from a first-hand account. And the Yaya Foundation is supporting the 4-H Leukodystrophy community. And then from there, we'll go to Emerson, who has a lot of personal connections with rare disease organizations down in South America. So he'll talk about patient advocacy in South America, Brazil and Colombia specifically, and maybe Mexico, I'm not too sure. But he's from Alexion Pharmaceuticals, which is awesome to have patient groups, patient organizations, researchers, clinicians, and we have pharma here. So full house at 5 o'clock at night, which is lovely. And then we're going to end with Renata and Juan talking about access programs in Brazil. And this is, I think Juan himself saw over 1,000 rare disease patients last year alone. So it'll be full of really cool conversations. I just ended it quickly. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rick, who is going to be doing the video for Durhane. And so we'll talk about access to rare disease drugs in Canada.
Hello, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to talk to you about what is the most exciting thing that's happening in terms of the rare disease community today in Canada, and that is Canada's new rare disease drug program and what our vision is for this program. So we're going to share to you a little bit the background into it and also what we're envisioning is going to be happening with this. So like many countries, challenges are in terms of getting access to therapies. But in Canada, we have a fairly convoluted process that starts, obviously, as most countries do, with the regulatory process. And then it goes into several other agencies in order for it to move on towards the final goal of getting into a public drug plan. The challenge and why it's so difficult is that most of that process was designed for the pre-90s, pre-biologics, pre-orphan drugs, pre-gene therapies. It involves several distinct agencies who each are separate from one another, but also have some overlapping mandates. In each case, they can make recommendations, but these are not necessarily binding, and the agreements that are actually negotiated for access may not actually be binding either. In Canada, also, what most people may not know is that we have both a private and a public drug plan. Many people do have a private drug plan, more than 75% of people do, but many of the drugs for rare diseases fall into the public drug plans, in part because of their high costs. So in many cases, what we have is the private drug plans, instead of the usual path of being able to say, once the drug is approved, we will make it available, have now started to say also, we will wait for a drug to get all the way through all the steps in terms of review in order for us to also say yes. So this is a challenge. And each one of these steps has its own time, so that you can see it starts when maybe a year, another 8 months, another 10 months. And even then, as we say, if it's negotiated to be available through the private public plans, there's no guarantee that it's actually going to be put into any kind of a public formulary. The other challenge, certainly in terms of drugs in Canada, is that many of them are not necessarily approved. And this has been a real problem across all the drug plans. As drugs are approved by the regulatory agency, certainly historically and even today, about less than a third of them actually do get into a public formulary. And this obviously applies to many of the drugs for rare diseases. So drugs take a long time. They don't actually get necessarily even made available once they're actually approved and negotiated. For rare disease drugs, we have a lot of challenges because of the price of a single drug. But in reality, when we look at how much the Canadian system pays for drugs for rare diseases, what we recognize is that it's actually a very, very small portion, somewhere, certainly under 5%, in the neighborhood of 3%, 280 million out of a total budget of 175,300 million. So this is, huge difference in terms of 175 million. So this is something that has to be taken into consideration when we talk about how much are we actually spending in terms of rare disease drugs. It is absolutely a fraction of what the total drug spend is. The other challenge we've had in Canada is that the public drug plans, when we look at other countries, and starting with Germany, Denmark, the UK, where there is in fact much better coverage, is actually very low. And we have in here, again, the problem is that we have a provincially administered public drug plan. So each one of the provinces, our 10 provinces and 3 territories, will have their own drug plans, and they will have different drugs that are on there, also different times to access. None of them come close to the best available drugs in the best available countries. And this is, of course, a huge problem for us. And, this is something that another reason why we're looking at this new drug strategy as being so important. What we also know, and I think as we've been saying here, is that the challenge is getting the drugs into Canada. So even though only 30% of approved drugs are actually made publicly funded, and certainly the publicly funded rare disease drugs are much fewer than they are in other countries, we're also stymied by the fact that there are many orphan drugs that are never approved in Canada, or they're approved many years later. This is a little bit of a snapshot of the situation in Canada, so that if you can look at the US, how many orphan drugs they've approved in the years 2014 to 2019, in those same years, those same drugs, very few of them get approved. So timely access in terms of approvals, but also in terms of just the sheer number. So this is the number of these drugs that are approved in Canada. And quite frankly, these are the drugs that are not approved that are in the US approvals even after February 2020. So even many drugs never actually get to Canada. They never get to the regulator. And you can imagine there's lots of reasons for that. Certainly a smaller market, but also the long and challenging process to get to a reimbursement. Another part of that, though, is the fact that Canada has never approved an orphan drug policy. And I think this is what makes it somewhat challenging for us. Whereas, as we know, there have been other countries that have adopted orphan drug legislation to really put support into the research and development for rare disease drugs. Canada historically has said we don't really want it, we don't really need it. And even today, there is not an actual orphan drug policy, legislation, regulations that are really designed to improve the research and development and to give officially a pathway for regulatory approval. That's not to say that we have not made great strides in being able to approve drugs, and drugs are designated as orphans elsewhere, but it has been a real challenge in terms of assuring researchers, developers, companies that there is a pathway and that this is in fact something that can be done in a fairly timely fashion. The other challenge in not having an orphan drug policy that supports research and development, though, is what I call we have no skin in the game. There's really no incentive in Canada to actually support rare diseases or orphan drugs because there isn't seen as a net return in that kind of investment. So this is a huge problem for us, as well as not contributing to the supply of rare disease drugs, recognizing again, very few diseases actually have treatments. I'm skipping over just talking about, again, why we need a new rare disease drug strategy or a new framework is, this is, I think, very typical for many countries, is this is our typical route to getting access to a rare disease drug, where a lot of advocacy, some of that advocacy is individual based, but a lot of the advocacy has actually been in terms of public displays, public demonstrations. And that sadly still continues today. This is just very recently, all of us in front of, the federal government office, the Canadian Parliament there. This is, I'm just going to skip through a few of these, but what we've known all along, of course, is that by having, the long process and the lack of actual investment in terms of research and development and bringing new drugs to market, but also at the far end in terms of limited market access. Again, a lot of advocacy. This was way back in 2006 when the first Fabry's drugs came into the market. How did we get access to them? Again, it was really very public demonstrations involving families and including their children. I just want to skip over to today because quite sadly, we're somewhat in that same position. This is a lovely pair of twins who just turned 3 years old. They were born with spinal muscular atrophy. Unfortunately, because of the non-centralized, access to specialists, these children were not diagnosed initially. They were misdiagnosed for a long time. By the time they actually got a diagnosis, it took them, they were almost 1.5 years old before they got to a specialist. And then by the time they got to the specialist, it took another several months to get them actually an access to the treatment that was available at the time. And of course, they had already begun to lose a lot of their muscle development functionality. What the parents really wanted, the mom was advocating for, was get them access to gene therapy. But by the time the advocacy had started and fully aware of it, they had actually aged out. They were too old for what the approval was in Canada, where the children would have to be under 2 years old to get access. So this became another long campaign. So, currently, we do have newborn screening. If these children have been born now, and if they've been in a center where there was newborn screening, they would have been picked up. If they had been more centrally located, they probably would have gotten to a specialist who would have recognized that this was in fact, or if we do a better job in terms of training our family physicians, pediatricians, they would have been diagnosed and could have been actually brought into the treatment scheme. The good news on this, I will have to say, is that at 3 years old, they were picked up by the company and by one of our clinician researchers and put into a clinical trial for gene therapy. And there today, both of them have been given access to the gene therapy, but it certainly was a long delay process. And of course, they had actually progressed significantly in terms of their disease by the time they got access. This is just another very quick case in families advocating for the first gene therapy for retinal disease. In many other countries, 30 some other countries, this drug is actually readily available. We know that in the US, almost every patient who has this condition is actually getting access to the therapy. It was approved in Canada, first gene therapy approved. It is now, just now, being considered 2 years later by the public drug plans to try to make it available. We have 2 teenagers, both of whom are likely to age out before and lose their functioning cones in order to get the treatment by the time it actually gets funded. And, you know, we've had also the fights with our private drug plans who have chosen to say it's a pre-existing condition. We don't want to cover it. So these are 2 children who are, you know, fastly approaching the time when they're not going to be able to get access. Young man here is both a martial arts expert and also a concert pianist who's just heading off to university, and it's finding it, really challenging in terms of what might happen. So again, it's back to the advocacy to try to get access. So why do we need a rare disease drug policy? I mean, Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, we've been pushing for this since the Fabry days back in 2006, where we were first given the hope that there could be a policy. We are an alliance of patient organizations, more than 100 patient groups. And obviously, one of the things we try to do is work on behalf of the entire population. And our focus really is in terms of policy we have had in Canada now a very, what I call a great rare opportunity to really begin to try to modernize the drug access here. Beginning in November 2018, there was in fact a modernization of the regulatory process, which actually brought the regulator in Canada up to about the same level as the FDA, as the European Medicines Agency, to be able to bring in the drugs on an expedited basis, give them an expedited review, and make what we really feel are very appropriate approvals, based on the clinical trials and the scientific information, probably in line with FDA, EMA. What did happen in 2018, some 12 years after we first began talking about it, the provinces and territories did come together and say, we need to have a different process for rare disease drugs. It's not working. There's just too much that's being delayed, but obviously dealing with the drugs one at a time was not actually making a significant impact in terms of new drugs coming in. So February 2019 was sort of the big, opportunity. With the new budget, the Canadian government at that point committed $1 billion to setting up a national rare disease drug strategy, saying it will be in place by 2022. And that was continuously supported in other actions that the federal government was doing. So we were quite energized and we're very much motivated by this, recognizing, of course, that there was going to be a lot of work to do in order to get it at least in place. What happened, I think, as many of you will know, we began to really pressure the government in terms of hosting the consultations. There was an election. And in March 2020, sort of a year after the first announcement, we actually had a commitment from the government then to begin consultations. And that's exactly when COVID happened. Everything kind of went to a stall, and we, sometime in October, after a long period of trying to continuously kind of pressure the government to come back and kind of talk to us about the consultations toward this, we decided we couldn't wait for them any longer. And the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders began to host a whole series of webinars, conferences, bringing together stakeholders, bringing together experts, both national and international, to really talk about what do we need to have in place in order to have this new drug program. And we hosted, I'm not even sure how many webinars and conferences we did up to the period at the end of December last year, when we had sort of a final conference to talk about what do we need to jumpstart it. In the middle of this, the government did, in fact, host a series of consultations, and quite nicely, because we'd done so much work up till then, many of the participants in the consultations as well, actually were all on the same page in terms of what we've been talking about. And the report that came out actually reflected that there was almost a consensus around what this new drug strategy, new drug program ought to look like. I just want to put this in here a little bit because I really am concerned that as we're looking at 2022 and we want to have a new drug program, we are very cognizant of the fact that governments are still very much, distracted by and looking at the concerns around pandemic. And what I have here is just the notion of, what would happen to the rare disease drug program if, in fact, we had what I call Back to the Future World 1, where we're just back to everything's done, pandemic's over, we're looking at 2019 again, picking up where we left off. That is, of course, a great opportunity for us to move forward in terms of what the recommendations are and to really have a focus on the rare disease drug program. Bigger concern, of course, is that if, we are looking at 2021, 2022, looking a lot like 2020, what if 2023, 2024 looks the same? I kind of call it Groundhog Day. Obviously more challenging, but no reason for us not to continue to persevere in terms of pushing forth on this rare disease drug strategy, the same as we've done over the last couple of years. And we think there is, in fact, an opportunity to do that because the challenges for rare diseases continue to happen with regard to people not getting access to care, not getting a timely diagnosis, and certainly not getting access to the medicines. The medicines are coming, the developments are still coming. So we would just have to work a bit harder to create that separate pathway. And the Future World 3 might be the best one, and that is, it's like, we don't have to worry about it anymore. COVID has become an endemic and we're ready to move on with that drug strategy. We shall see. Most important for us right now is that we embed this rare disease drug strategy in what we call a drug in a rare disease strategy, and that there are, in fact, really important infrastructure developments that have to take place in order for us to have a viable, sustainable, affordable rare disease drug plan. So in 2015, we have put forth a strategy with 5 pillars in it that are still what we believe is essential. And what we're saying is that if we're going to be investing some of that $500 million, it isn't to go to pay for drugs, it's to develop the infrastructure so we can have an accessible, affordable rare disease drug program. One of the most important things is to invest in diagnosis, including everything from newborn screening to this next generation genomics sequencing, so that we can have accurate, timely diagnoses that would be able to identify patients, before they are certainly in the need of the therapy, but also to be able to make sure that we can track them and keep and be able to monitor their response to therapies. We also have to have an investment in research. We need to come back to making sure Canada is involved in clinical trials, that we are able to have a research network to, patient registries, that we're able to have the capacity in our centers for being able to assess how well patients are doing on the therapies and to be able to demonstrate, certainly with regard to real world evidence, how well they're succeeding on the therapies. We need to have a network of rare disease centers. And this, again, is part of what we have in place to some degree, but really need to build upon it from the pediatric centers that we've got, and hopefully becoming a part of the international network that the WHO Rare Disease International has been proposing as a part of a global network. We need to have managed access. And this is the core of what we're thinking in terms of the rare disease drug strategy. There's got to be a program that allows drugs as they come in, even with small clinical trials, short clinical trials, high uncertainty in terms of the long-term value of it. If there is, in fact, an urgent need, that we're able to put forth a managed access scheme immediately to actually bring people into therapy and to be able to have the collection of that information on a go-forth basis. Picking up on what we said before, having patient registries, having centers that are networked, and certainly, having the opportunity to be able to collect and analyze that data from the electronic health records. We need in those patient registries to focus on real-world evidence, which actually is coming into place very much in Canada, as they are in many other countries. And we need to actually have a realistic assessment of the value of these therapies, where we're able to do the health technology assessment, the value for, proposition at the time when we've got enough information, not as we do it now in Canada, where we do the assessment when the drugs are first being brought to market, when we have very little experience with them and only limited clinical trial data. But we need to do this after they've been made available to patients over a period of time, bringing in together also the real world evidence. So this is, again, core and part of that strategy. So I'm going to kind of finish off with what do we need to do in this next step of implementation. We're very assured that we're going to have this new rare disease drug program at least set up, not a full-blown program, but really in a position where we can start to do these proof of concept projects, where we're able to take drugs as they're being brought into the Canadian market to really design the right program around them, and that we can get them to people at a timely fashion. But what we need to do, first of all, is to make sure that we've got patient organizations that are embedded at all levels of this rare drug program. It's got to be patient inclusive. And we've had that reassurance. We have to have some way of being able to decide which drugs should be included. Not every drug needs to have a managed program. So a little bit like the UK's, highly specialized therapeutics program. What are the criteria? What drugs need to be assessed in that way? How should we make decisions in terms of which patients should get access? What do we need to do on a go-forward basis in order to make sure that it's working for them? I think the other thing that we want to be able to do, of course, is to make sure that we're going to be able to get the right pricing out of this. And this is something we all have to collaborate on. Coming back to the question, do we need an orphan drug policy? Should we be invested in research and development? Should we be looking how we contribute to new knowledge in terms of potential therapies? What should the governance structure look like? This is something that's going to be somewhat brand new. Obviously, we've got other kinds of structures we can build on, but what would look like in terms of the overall governance, who needs to be on it, how much independence. And the two other things that we need to make sure is that we've got structures. We need transparency consultations. We need to assure that there's going to be accountability. And we want to make sure that we're able to set up the right kinds of monitoring and an evaluation on how well it's working on a go-forth basis. We have $1 billion been committed over the first 2 years. We're hoping that that actually will be made available for all of these steps, because this is what we need to have in order to make sure we're going to be able to do this appropriately. We're in great discussions with the governments at this point. We need to make sure the provincial governments are brought into place so that they are very much in agreement in terms of where they see the investments being made, and that we also have, obviously, the health professionals, the patients, the researchers that are part and parcel of this new program. So thank you very, very much. And hopefully we will have, the ability to give you a great update in terms of how it's rolling out as we move forward.
Okay, that had a lot to unpack in that. I can't believe that patients are phasing out of eligibility. It is not without effort on the patient groups or court or anybody. So it actually really just proves the importance of advocacy, because the windows are very small for rare disease, and every milestone matters. It doesn't matter how long it takes, it matters. So I love that presentation. I really wish he was here to answer some questions, but if you do have questions, pop them in the chat, because I'm sure one of us, because we have 6 experts here, so hopefully they can't address Canada specifically, but you never know. It's very similar. So I'm going to hand it over to Heidi and Andra, who are going to give a presentation on the Rare as One program from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And then they're going to open it up for a discussion with the Yaya Foundation. So you'll have 4 faces on your screen and not a presentation, which is lovely. So you can discuss how they got the first grant, what they learned on the program, things like that. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. It really meant the world that you wanted to be a part of this.
Thank you so much. And we're really excited. I love your energy. It's such a great energy to bring to this space for Rare Disease Month, and certainly for the different time zones that we have joining us tonight. And thanks to Beacon for inviting us to talk about the importance and impact of capacity building and the learnings that Heidi and I and the rest of the Rare as One team have found from the first few years of the Rare as One network. I also want to just say a quick thanks to the sponsors for providing this important platform, and everyone here joining us. And yes, certainly wish Durhane was here with us. It's always an honor to follow in her footsteps and the incredible work that she's doing. So today, Heidi and I want to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing in the US and what we've been learning We'll talk to you about the patient-driven research concept that we have that we feel is really important for the rare disease landscape. We'll talk about Rare as One and the network that we have been supporting for the last 2 years and are now into the third years. We've grown to 50 organizations. I'll talk with you a little bit about the capacity building tools and trainings that we also provide in addition to the grants these groups are receiving. And we want to share with you what we've seen so far. So first, I'll just start with a very quick introduction. My name is Andra Stratton. I'm the program associate for Rare as One, and my role is to provide the capacity building support for the groups to help fill the gaps that they have in their organization and really help support the grant requirements. I came to this work as a rare disease patient after a 37-year diagnostic odyssey. I was born with familial partial lipodystrophy, but did not know that until I was 37 years old, after many, many years of significant health complications that were just a mystery. So much a story like many of you. I started a foundation and ran that foundation, working with doctors all over the world and building the patient community, and really fell in love with this space. But I did so without any capacity. And to run an organization, as you know, without any capacity is very draining on the foundation, on the stability of the foundation, on my personal finances, emotional and physical well-being. And I'm really pleased to be able to provide the support that we do for grantees so they do not have to really suffer some of the consequences that I suffered for so many years without capacity. From here, I'm going to pass it on over to my colleague and partner in crime, Heidi Bjornson-Pinnell.
Thank you, Andra. It's such an honor to work with you. I'm Heidi Bjornson-Pinnell. I'm the program manager for Rare as One. I am an attorney in my past life. I came to this work when I had 2 children that were diagnosed with primary ciliary dyskinesia, a rare progressive lung disease. And I spent many years working on the board of the PCD Foundation, and now here at CZI, helping to scale this work across the rare disease community. Next slide, please. So the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative was founded by Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, launched 5 years ago on the birth of their first daughter, with the mission to build a more inclusive, just, and healthy future for everyone. Next slide. CZI has 3 main pillars: in science, education, and justice and opportunity. In science, we have the audacious goal to support the science and technology that will make it possible to cure, prevent, or manage all diseases by the end of the century. So we have 80 years to get that done, and we look for cross-cutting ways to drive forward research. And so the question that we have is, how can we support and leverage the power of patients to accelerate research and drive progress against disease? At CZI, we believe that those impacted by problems should be part of the solution. And in rare disease, we already saw that happening. Rare disease patients who have deep personal knowledge of their disease areas and a sense of urgency like no others were driving forward research in their rare disease areas. And so we wanted to turn to patients themselves who are part of this problem to see how we could leverage their power and their expertise to make a difference towards the development of treatments and cures. Next slide. And so we launched a program at CZI in patient-driven research. We saw that patients already were identifying others with their diseases, that they were building strong and inclusive communities and developing patient organizations. And these organizations were building networks of researchers, bringing them together in convenings and aligning along shared research priorities. They were launching registries and biobanks and collecting critical data, engaging industry and entering into clinical trials and identifying treatments and cures in their disease areas. And so we wanted to see how we could leverage CZI's capacities in grant making, technology, and advocacy to support this model of patient-driven research, and to think about how we could help lower the barriers that patient communities face and that Andra was just speaking to at each of these key stages, how we could build and strengthen the capacity of these organizations, and how we could promote collaboration and shared learnings across them. Next slide. And so in 2020, we launched a request for applications, soliciting applications from rare disease patient-driven organizations with the goals of building and strengthening a collaborative research network in their disease area, hosting an international research convening, bringing together researchers from across their community, and aligning that community, both the patients and the researchers, along shared research priorities. We gave these organizations $450,000 over 2 years and launched a capacity building program with multiple opportunities for these organizations to collaborate and learn from one another. And so I am going to turn it over back to Andra to tell you a little bit more about this capacity building program and what our vision for it was.
So as Heidi was talking about, we really believe that there are multiple pillars in capacity building, and we hypothesized that if we strengthen communities and create stronger leaders, if we help build capacity and help strengthen organizations, and if we promote collaboration and networks, that we're going to have stronger movements, and all of that will help us achieve higher impact in the work that they're doing. So we looked at this at many different angles. We started with community building, and we all know that the rare disease community is a strong community. In fact, it's really quite like a family, even internationally. But we really wanted to level the playing field for some of these organizations and help build community within the network of the grantees who received, the first 30 grantees who received the grant. We did this in many different ways. We held small group workshops. We had collective impact work streams where they worked together on specific projects. We offered mentorship programs with other advocates who were further along in their journey, and science advising with folks who were really able to help and understand, advise in the scientific aspect of rare disease. And while COVID hit right at the beginning of our program, we were still really able to successfully build community with virtual convenings. We're still hoping for an in-person one, but we have done surprisingly well with the virtual convenings. And then finally, we've had an online forum, the private forum for the groups to really build community, share resources, ask questions. But in addition to the community building, we needed to identify some gaps in training. We strongly believe that there's a lot of incredible resources out there from our umbrella organizations in rare disease. There are many different opportunities to learn from others and endless amount of webinars, as you know, but we still think there were some gaps. So we really looked at what was out there, what needed improving, and what needed to be created. And so we developed a series of trainings and individualized coaching for the Rares One network that helped fill some of those gaps. And just some examples, some hiring and management trainings. Certainly there's lots of webinars out there for that. But when you're thinking about your small rare disease community, I think there's some unusual aspects that folks really wanted to learn about and think about before they made the decision to do that. We talked a lot about international advocacy, and we worked with our partners at Yordis to do that. ICD code roadmap, and that's something here in the US. Grant writing, developing research's agenda, and fundraising. So you can see really the capacity, the trainings were anywhere from organizational capacity to research capacity. And training and coaching isn't just enough. I mean, really, it's a thoughtful 360-degree requirement to truly build capacity in all areas and help strengthen these organizations. So in addition to the forum I mentioned, we've got our Rares One newsletter to keep everyone up to date. We've got the coaching, finance and operations. huge, important need we found. There was a big gap in this space. And then just able to fill the grant requirements. They needed to hold an international conference, scientific conference. And so we provided conference planning support, tech support, and again, I mentioned science advising and mentorship. Heidi, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we found over the last 2 years?
Thanks, Andra. Yes, it's been an amazing opportunity, I think, to support these organizations. And we've learned just as much from working with them as I think that they have learned from us. But we've seen really incredible impact of this program, and most importantly, of the power of patients over these past 2 years. They have engaged nearly 600 new researchers in their networks. They have held over 74 international scientific convenings. This is in 2 years during COVID. They have prioritized 26 research agendas, launched 24 registries and 19 biobanks, funded and supported 135 research projects, engaged in 65 industry partnerships, and launched 17 clinical trials. And so what we're seeing is that with modest support, funding to hire a few key staff and support these organizational efforts, coupled with trainings in specific areas, patient-led rare disease organizations can really be catalyzed to have a critical outsized impact on rare disease research. Next slide, please. And so seeing the tremendous success that these patient organizations are having, at the end of 2021, we funded an additional 20 patient-led rare disease advocacy organizations to become a part of the RARES1 network. There's specific focus for this cohort of organizations to address diagnosis-related research challenges in their disease areas, which, as Durhane spoke to, and as we all know, are a critical issue in rare disease, and equally to address the importance of diversity within their communities and within the research themselves. We provided these organizations with $600,000 over 3 years, crossing over in time with the cycle 1 of the RARES1 network, and creating opportunities for them to engage and learn from one another and really participate in a network of networks. Building further on this work, yesterday we were really excited to announce 2 new patient-partnered collaborative requests for applications in single-cell analysis of rare inflammatory pediatric disease, and also in rare neurodegenerative disease. These 2 RFAs are bringing together research teams, clinicians, and researchers with patient-led rare disease organizations, and actively centering patients and patient organizations throughout the research process. So from design of the research project to engagement of the patient community to dissemination of results and everything in between. These patient organizations will be compensated for their participation in the research, and with the goal of advancing the fundamental understanding of rare disease. Next slide, please. Beyond the RARES1 network, we also work to address the tech, infrastructure, equity, and advocacy-related challenges in the rare disease field. We do this through support for national and international umbrella organizations, NORD and EURORDIS as 2 examples, but many others as well. Organizations that are addressing diversity-related challenges in the rare disease field, ERCAL, for instance, in Latin America and the Caribbean, and Black Women's Health Imperative here in the United States. Organizations that are addressing scientific and research-related challenges, particularly around diagnosis, for instance, the Rare Genomes Project, and those addressing infrastructure issues in the rare disease space. So again, as Durhane spoke to, Rare Disease International and the efforts to develop a network of global centers. We are honored to be a part of this global community of patients and advocates working to advance research in rare disease and to elevate the patient voice, and really look forward to our continued work together. Thank you for having us here. I am now really privileged to turn you over to Ron Garber and Christina Butterworth from the Yaya Foundation. Like all of our RARES1 grantees, they're absolutely just an exceptional organization, incredibly inspiring, and have made tremendous progress in the past 2 years. It's been an incredible honor to work alongside them and watch them grow and really make a huge impact in 4-H leukodystrophy. So with that, I'm going to turn you over to Ron.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll pull up my slides, and Heidi, thank you so much. The privilege is ours. It's a privilege to be here with you. I'm so grateful that the Yaya Foundation and our disease community and 4-H is a beneficiary of the thought that you and Andra have put into building organizational capacity. And I'll just add that I'm always so moved when I hear Andra's personal story. And I'm grateful to be a beneficiary of the wisdom that she's accumulated in her years of work, including, of course, the importance of building organizational capacity. So that's what I'm really excited to share about today, the power of capacity building for the Yaya Foundation, and I believe for any rare disease advocate. So I'm Ron Garber. I am a co-founder of the Yaya Foundation, and I am a dad. And that's my wife and me with our daughter Yaya on her first birthday. Yaya had been diagnosed with 4-H leukodystrophy just 4 months earlier, and she passed away just 3 weeks after this photo was taken. After she died, my wife and I connected with other families in our disease community and launched the Yaya Foundation in her memory. Today, the Yaya Foundation is the only organization in the world fighting for people affected by 4-H. And that's our amazing team. But we didn't always have this amazing team. And that's why Christina and I are here presenting today. So you'll hear lots more about Christina and Valerie over the next 15 minutes or so. And Christina will have a lot to share as well in just a bit. There's really quick background on 4-H leukodystrophy. The 4 H's stand for hypomyelination, hypodontia, and hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. It's an autorecessive genetic neurological disease that is progressive and life-limiting, and we haven't discovered a treatment or cure yet. So, getting to present here with Heidi and Andra about capacity building, I really can't help but think back to the first time that I met Heidi and Andra, and I truly still get the chills just thinking about it. And it's interesting and instructive. As a grantee, our first touch point with the Rare As One team was focused on organizational capacity. And so the first time we met was the Yaya Foundation's Rare As One capacity assessment. And the reason I get the chills, I have them now, thinking back to that meeting is because as excited as we were about being awarded the grant, and certainly we all see, and Blaine mentioned sort of the dollars that CZI is investing in rare disease patient organization, we were certainly excited about the funding, but that meeting, that capacity assessment was the moment that we truly understood the power of the opportunity that Rare As One presented. And that was an opportunity to build a top-notch, high-performing, sustainable organization. And it was apparent from Andra and Heidi's presentation, but that was because they had really thought of everything and came into that capacity assessment, I think, basically knowing our needs better than we did. Things like hiring and financial systems and marketing and on. You saw it in their slides. And we left that meeting determined to take full advantage of the opportunity. So just as I think back to those early days, some of our challenges back then, at the time of that meeting, we were still a very immature, I would call us a baby organization. We were less than a year old. We had no dedicated staff. I think we had really good board and high level leadership, but basically just me operating, and I have a full-time job. And at that time, 1 young living child, now 2. And I was doing all of the foundation work sort of after my work day and after my son went to sleep. So I had my own capacity constraints. And frankly, I really believe, I don't think I have the skill set to run the Yaya Foundation. And you'll hear from Christina, I think she does. But in those early days, it was really hard for me to let go of the work. I viewed my work with the foundation as my opportunity to continue to be Yaya's dad. And it was really hard for me to let go. Another challenge back then was that all of our systems and processes were manual. And this is kind of the boring part of rare disease advocacy work or any advocacy work, but it's really important. All of our systems were manual. And part of the reason for this is that at that time, I believed really strongly that every single penny we raised had to go to research. And I mean it. Like if someone wanted me to spend $9.99 on a MailChimp subscription, they really would have had to wrestle that money away from me. But that ended up meaning that all of our records were either spreadsheets or in my head. All of our processes were manual. And so email lists, donor lists, financial statements, And whenever we had to prepare our annual report or send out an email blast, I basically wouldn't sleep, and all of my other important foundation work would be put on hold, and that held us back. Finally, we had lack of clarity on research. We did some good early fundraising, but really didn't know what work we should be investing in. And that's because we didn't have a strategy yet. And then we also had a small community of researchers focusing on our disease with low awareness outside of that core group. So we'll discuss how we address these challenges, but I'll start to conclude here by sharing proudly that we've made a lot of progress since those early days. And it, of course, starts with the additions of Christina Butterworth, who's joining me today, the Yaya Foundation's executive director, and Valerie Greger, our science director. Between them, they have decades of experience in biotech and healthcare. And before joining the Yaya Foundation, they had never heard of 4-H. But now they're as passionate about our disease community as anyone, and our community gets the benefit of their considerable skill sets and hearts every single day. And I'm really proud of that. We invested in organizational systems and processes. So I forked over the $9.99 for MailChimp, and we invested in accounting systems, IT, website and branding, graphic design, and a stakeholder relationship management system. And those investments have been incredibly worthwhile and freed us up to do more work and accomplish more, as I'll share in just a second. We connected with other rare disease organizations in the Rare as One network and beyond to share learnings. And we've grown our research community by bringing families, researchers, and clinicians together and crowdsourcing their questions and ideas to develop a research strategy, which we call our research roadmap. And all of that has created hugely increased capacity that has enabled us to advance the Yaya Foundation beyond really my wildest dreams from those early days. And I'll just tease this last slide because I think we're going to get into some of our specific accomplishments over the rest of our time together. But I'm so proud of what we've accomplished over the last 2 years, together with CZI, advances in data collection, a significant gene therapy collaboration, big steps forward in our fundraising. And none of these accomplishments would have been possible without our team and without our systems. And I know that our investments in capacity building are going to enable us to accomplish the ambitious goals we've set for ourselves going forward and to change the world for people and families affected by 4-H leukodystrophy. With that, I'll stop sharing, and maybe Andra, invite you to join me back with Christina and Heidi as well.
That was brilliant. I'll try to get everybody back, and then I'll spotlight you so no one sees just one face. Okay, yeah, so I think it's spotlight. I'll let you go from there, Christina.
Thanks, Blaine. You're right. It was brilliant. Ron and Christina are brilliant, and I want to say that we asked Ron and Christina to join us because their willingness to share their vulnerability in the challenges of capacity building stood out from the very beginning, but that vulnerability led to just tremendous success. But I think that'll also tell you that there are 29 other groups in cycle 1 of the network have made similar incredible impact and strides in their community. So we want to make sure we give a shout out to our whole Rare as One network family because it's just really remarkable what they've done. I'm going to start with our last few minutes here, Ron. And Christina, I'd love to talk with you about, let's go to that point. And we always joke, I always joke about capacity building, and it's not particularly exciting to talk about, right? People want to talk about the research and the impact, but we've talked a lot about how impossible, or difficult that can be without capacity. You mentioned in the very beginning that, you had some concerns about spending $9.99 on MailChimp. Structurally, what advice would you give to someone who is hesitant, who says, no, we're racing the clock. It's all about research. We have no time for MailChimp. What advice would you give now?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. And then Christina, would you jump in? Because Christina knows, the reason that we're making these investments is because Christina is like, no, this will enable us to accomplish X, Y, and Z. for me, the macro look is that, like, look, bringing a growth mindset to this work and knowing that a little bit of investment in the less sexy stuff like financial and accounting systems, it will just make a huge impact. And in our case, it's, like I said, enabled us to achieve things that I never dreamed of achieving when we started. But Christina, why don't you convince me all the time about and just demonstrate the value of these investments?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us. And we're just so proud to speak on behalf of, I guess, the 4-H leukodystrophy community, but also the Rare as One community that we're so excited continues to grow. So I guess I would say, many founders, many rare disease advocates, many affected families, they have, dreams and visions and all of those things. But in my mind, as someone with, a business and product background, I think a lot about prioritization. I think a lot about what systems, what capacity, what expertise and skills and discipline and process, what needs to happen in order to realize those dreams and in order to realize that vision. And until you sort of have a clear set of priorities and you're able to stand up the capacity that can support and achieve those goals, I think we run the risk of spinning our wheels a lot. We run the risk of spending our time on the wrong things. We run the risk of chasing down every really small distraction. And I don't think that's how any of us gets to the finish line that we all desire to get to. So.
Yeah, I think that's so true, Christina. And we all know in the rare disease community, I think how very real the risk of burnout is, and how incredibly draining this work is. And in addition to our personal lives, which are also so challenging in so many ways often. I'm curious if you can give like a specific example of how developing your internal capacity has really enabled you to pursue certain research opportunities or engage in the science in a way that you really want to be able to do.
Go ahead,
Go ahead, Christina. No, go ahead.
You know which one I'm going to say. Well, one of my favorite ones is because we're an ultra rare disease and community, like many of you out there, it is incredibly important for us and a priority and a way that we realize our vision to expand who thinks about rare disease and who thinks about 4-H leukodystrophy specifically. We are always eager to continue to raise awareness in any, community or space that we can, and research particularly. So one very specific example is we host global scientific seminars where we invite not only the experts in the space of 4-H, but also experts in sort of complementary disciplines. And we host these in an open forum. All are welcome. We have researchers come to us that say that they want to talk about their respective specific areas. And we have had great engagement. And we continue to sort of build that network of networks, and our capacity has opened up tremendously as a result.
That's great. I'll if I may, I'll just add two really concrete ones in addition to Christina's. One is in fundraising. I mentioned I used to manually send out these emails, and it was a ton of work, and I would have to update our Google spreadsheet with the donations that came in, and it took so much time. It took me away from the stuff that I really wanted to be doing in those days, which was engaging with researchers. We invested maybe $1,000 in a customer relationship management software, whatever QuickBooks cost, accounting software, and now we have and some planning from Christina, who plans and knows how to execute ideas, and our end of year fundraising as a result of those modest investments and Christina's leadership. In our end of year fundraising for 2021, we were probably 5 or 6 times our full year fundraising for all of the year prior to the Rare as One grant. So those modest investments and some leadership paid enormous dividends. And now we have, we're just much better financed and able to invest in much bigger goals. And the segue there is, back to research, yeah, we all care about research. These investments have enabled us to impact research in a much more meaningful way. And, you know, I mentioned at the early days, we didn't have a research strategy. And Christina, you know, I was smiling when she was talking about prioritization because she's talking about me. So let's talk to this person, let's talk to that person, and bounce around from idea to idea. You know, when we brought together the research community that Christina was just talking about, we crowdsourced our ideas into a research roadmap, and we now have a pretty focused, you know, we have a lot of work to do in our disease community, but we have a pretty focused strategy for how we approach research. And this year, we're not talking about a million different investments that we can make. We're sort of talking about 3 or 4, and we have a pretty clear-eyed idea of how we can impact research in a meaningful way with more resources to support that.
That's so fantastic on every level. I'm so excited for the direction that your organization is headed. It's really amazing. I think one last question that would be relevant to our community listening in here is like how you think about this. I know, Christina, you just spoke about, you know, these forums that you hold that bring in international researchers. Like how else do you think about expanding or engaging the international community or working with other partners in that space?
So I think another thing that we have thought about is how do we reach families, and in a way that we've thought about doing that is either through the research community or through the clinician and the care delivery community. And so it's a little almost like reverse engineering, right? So the more you just continue to get the word out about our disease within the research space, you can also, you know, it's important to us to continue to find the families and bring the families into our community so we can get them connected to better care, so we can get them in our data collection, so we can really get a better sense of the prevalence of our disease and really get a better understanding, you know, through natural history about what that disease looks like and clinical trial design and all of those kinds of things. So none of these things really sits on its own, right? You know, all of these connections and capacity moments, they're all interconnected. I don't know if I answered your question, Heidi, but that's what came to mind.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ron and Christina. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Just such an honor to have you work alongside you and the entire Rare as One network. I have to give an extra special thank you to Heidi for her vision in building this program with Tanya Simoncelli. It's just really incredible honor to work on something that's so important and so unique. And we encourage all of you partners to consider supporting general operating support and capacity building. It goes far beyond what you would imagine it would, and really the impact and acceleration we're showing it. It's just been remarkable. Thanks, Beacon, for having us, and we'll be happy to stick around and answer some questions.
Oh, thank you guys. It was literally like talking to the American version of Beacon. So it was really cool. Every thought process we've had was just echoed. Thank you so much for giving patient groups the resources they need to professionalize. And Ron saying like the $10 for MailChimp, that is where we are for, we're trying to professionalize and we're trying to make it so that isn't a big deal. So I resonated with that. I think our audience did too, probably had a few laughs. So thank you guys so much for a brilliant session, really insightful. And I'm just so excited to watch your progress from across the pond until I go home. So I'm gonna introduce, thanks guys. I'm gonna introduce Emerson from Alexion, who is gonna be talking to us today about South America. So stage is yours, Emerson.
Thank you. Thank you, Blaine. Thank you for having me here. And I would like to shout out the last presentation. This was just amazing work that you guys have been doing. It's really inspiring to us from kind of the other side to see so much focus and so much passion doing a wonderful job. I would just share my screen real quickly. And I would also thank you guys for the patience with any minor mistake in the English. So it's not my mother language. So this will probably come during the presentation. So I will talk more about the South American in a minute. Before we do that, I would like to kind of introduce to you why we are doing the work that we have been doing at Alexion, and a little bit of the way that we are doing it. First of all, Alexion AstraZeneca for a while now, it's have been building a specialized team of patient advocacy leads across the world, trying to get the most highly tailored engagement strategic to patient advocacy groups and to patients, in order for us to contribute better, not only with the company but also with the communities that we serve. So the goal here is like to contribute since the early stages of our drug development and to the commercialization of a drug, and to build relationships that are not only case by case, but are long-term relationships with patient advocacy groups and with the rare disease community as well. Mainly the work that we do externally with patient advocacy groups is identifying unmet needs of the community, working with them, identifying gaps in treatment, gaps on diagnosis, working with PEGs, also understanding their needs, their objectives, their vision about the scenario or the environment they're in. Also trying to have insights or to get insights from them about our clinical trials. How can we shape that to be more patient-centric, to be to address more the needs of the patients, to be more diverse, to become a better company since the early stages of the development of the drug. Also, understanding and sharing the burden of treatment and sharing the burden of the disease inside the company, working with patient advocacy organizations in disease education materials, with branded and unbranded material, about disease materials, and also working with the patient advocacy groups in building the most high-touch patient support programs that can we bring to the table. And this is important here because we are, and maybe you guys heard, I'm talking about this another moment of the presentation, we are trying to shift from a paradigm of getting the patient validation or the patient community validation of something that we just built, to a co-creation with patient groups, to a co-creation with patient community. So we are trying not longer to create some service, create some material and ask for the community, is this good or not, but create with them, validate with them, endorse with them all the things, all the service that we build before launching it. And then this is the external side of it. Like we engage, trying to build long-term relationships with them, specifying that we are there for a reason, and trying not to pass the wrong expectations for them, because we know that a simple engagement that we do with a patient can mean a lot of things to them, like create create hope, maybe bring to the table some subject that's kind of sensitive to them. So we are really ethical on this area. In the internal side, the importance of the work that we have been doing in this way is kind of bring to the table of all the departments that we have within Alexion, the voice of those patients. So we engage with the rare disease community, with the environment that they are within, and share this on and with all the departments that we have inside Alexion. And in Alexion, we do not see patient centricity just about like, okay, you're going to share the patient voice, or you're going to participate on some, I don't know, some webinar, internal webinar or something, but we do have a seat on the table. It doesn't matter what decision is going to be brought to the table, but we have a seat there, because we know that any decision that we take can impact the life of the patient. And this comes with kind of a lot of an amount of workload more than the usual, but it's good because we can guarantee that the decisions that we take are being patient-centric. So it's not only about connecting a patient or a patient group to our medical department or to our clinical operational department, but it's bringing them to have a voice there. And starting to talk about Latin America, and this is important because I feel like most of the conversation that I have, this is a gap that I get on the underline of the conversation. We have to start to talk about the size of the Latin America and how much patients are impacted by the decisions that we take as pharma companies, and also how they are impacted by those decisions. So when we get the data that all those countries, and I'm not considering all here, just the blue ones that we can see in the left side of the slide, we get approximately 30 million patients living with rare diseases in Latin America. So, and this is huge, and this comes with a lot of complexity, and I will just exemplify why. Yes, we have a huge or a good percentage of patients living in the big cities, kind of living in São Paulo, Bogota, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, and probably or possibly those patients have access to the best tools for diagnosis or the best tools for treating their ill that they can get on those cities, because they're kind of they are metropolis, so they have like a good access of those kind of things. But when we are talking about Latin America, even inside the same country, we have some complexity. Like we are talking about a patient in São Paulo, but we are talking about a patient with a rare disease in the middle of the Amazon. So the access to those kind of tools are not the same. We are also talking about Bogota, but we can talk about Bogota and also the zone of where we have the coffee farms in Colombia. This is near to Amazonia. To the Amazon, and also talk about patients living in the border of the Venezuela, for example. So it's a highly complex scenario. It's a highly complex environment, and it's a huge geographic area to cover and to have a simple solution to deliver. So we are talking about kind of a scenario in Brazil and a total different scenario in Mexico. Like Brazil is living something that Mexico is not, but it will become similar in a few years, and this can be faced upside down as well. We talk about a lot of challenges here, but I have to say the work that patient advocacy groups are doing in the whole region, it is just amazing. We have easily, I put this number here, but I do know that's much more than that. We have easily more than 100 patient advocacy groups across the region. We have a bunch of umbrella groups, not specific disease state groups. Like an umbrella group takes care of a bunch of rare diseases, and they offer support. They focus on disseminating quality information, and I will talk in a little bit about that as well. We have such a beautiful projects. And as an example, we have a project owned by a patient advocacy group in Brazil. It's called House of Rare. It will be the first of all hospital destined only to rare disease patients in the whole Latin America. And this project is led, owned, and will be managed by a patient advocacy group solely. They, of course, they do their connections with public entities, with the government affairs scene, but they will manage the first, at least in Latin America, the first hospital dedicated only for rare disease patients. They also are investing in the kind of the last 2 years or 2 or more years, a little bit more years, in connecting with international patient advocacy groups in order to benchmark best solutions to bring to the table, to bring to the discussions with the with government groups, with senators, with congressmen, in order to have like, okay, this works there in Canada, maybe it will work here. This works in UK, maybe it will work here. So I have to shout out the work that patient advocacy groups are doing in the whole region. And about the regulation and about the access to, talking a little bit more focused on the medications, the governments are implementing through the years, more or less from the last 10 years, from the last decade so far, a lot of regulations trying to address patient needs. Although those patients still face challenges, difficulties in accessing not only treatment, but also diagnostic and also multidisciplinary care, for example. As I said, is a whole region, is a really huge region talking geographically. So we still lack a coalition among governments trying to understand the rare disease environment and delivering like one wave solutions or one good solution for at least for a part of the challenge. We are improving in clinical trials. We still have a pathway to go, but we are improving. And talking about coming back to Alexion, we are trying to be more diverse on our clinical trials. So this includes those 30 million patients that I just talked about. So a little bit about the regulations that we have and the advances that we made across the region. We started, and this is not an exhaustive list, it's an exhaustive list. It's a lot of work that is being doing inside the countries. It's a lot of minor work, huge work that the countries are involved with, but these are kind of the macro scene of the countries. We started with Colombia in 2010 that implemented a law of social protection for rare disease patients, tried to implement measures to address patients' needs, and I will always say try, because we still have room of opportunity to guarantee those laws to be kind of addressed to patients. Like they try to implement a data collection, a system to collect data from rare disease patients, not kind of a registry of rare disease patients. And after that, we moved to Argentina in 2011, also building a national data registry, trying to create centers of excellence to attend those patients, expand newborn screening. And you're going to see that we have some really good implementations in one country that differs from another. And if we put all together, we will be a great solution for rare disease patients. That's where I said that we are kind of lacking a little bit of coalition among the region. After that, we have Mexico that defines the concepts of rare diseases. This is important because they are trying to see who is going to be within this law, who is going to be attended by this law, or who is going to be outside, and try to get another solutions or the standard solution that they have for the general population. And on this law of Mexico, they reinforce that medicine should be available to rare disease patients. In Brazil in 2014, and I bet that the next group will talk a little bit further and deeper about this, we have an ordinance 199 that established the creation of rare disease centers where patients can go and have like a multidisciplinary care to them. It aims the improving of HCP training in rare diseases and developing clinical protocols for prioritize research and development. And last, we have Ricarte Soto law. This is a really specific law, and it's a really good law. That's one of the most sophisticated laws in Latin America, because it's a law that includes the patients in the HEA process in a really sophisticated way. So, and what are the kind of going deeper on the challenge that we have in Latin America, and talking a little bit only about Colombia and Brazil, we still have challenges with payers where we have to overcome barriers in assessing the treatments and maintaining the treatments. And I will give an example in a bit. We have a challenge where we have room to grow on passing through HCPs and also to the government the importance of paying attention on the severity of the conditions and the urgency of treatment of each disease. On those two countries, commonly patients must seek for judicial support to guarantee their constitutional right to healthcare, and building and proposing new public policies. And this become a little bit more complex with the pandemic because we have a high spender on this area on both countries. Talking about access here, it is unfortunately common on those countries that if a medicine is not incorporated, or if it's not, in the case of Colombia, if the medicine is not commercially approved by INVIMA, the Colombia EMA, patients have to sue the government in order to get the medication. In Brazil, this happened as well. In Colombia, we do not have a centralized purchase by the government. We have more a system of HMOs, but in Brazil, we do have a centralized purchase by the government, which means if the government kind of enters in a shortage of some medicine, this will impact the whole quota of patients, the whole panel of patients. And this is complex because patients try to advocate for them and by others, but it's difficult. As a centralized purchase, they most of the times have to wait. Even so, they have this tool of suing the government. They have, most of the times when this kind of thing happens, they have to wait. And sometimes the worst happen. Geographically, we have difficult, as I said, from regions that are not close to healthcare centers or not close to big cities. People struggle to access proper tools to diagnostic. They also have challenges not only assessing tools for diagnostic, but even so, when a patient already have the treatment, when they have access to treatment, they pass through a challenge where they live so far from the nearest infusion center. For example, I have an example in Colombia from a patient that have to commute 8 hours to get to an infusion center, and this is awful. And you can say, okay, but you as pharma can help patients. You can do kind of maybe home infusion, but then by the regulations of Colombia, a person for having a home infusion, for example, have to have a proper floor on their house, and patients in rural zones or rural places do not have this proper floor on their houses, so we cannot help patients sending a home infusion to their house. This is kind of a challenge across the world, but patient advocacy groups does not have the amount of resources that they can have to support patients across the country, because we are talking about two huge countries geographically. Also, patients have difficulty to find reliable resources or reliable source of information besides their treating HCPs. And this is difficult because most of the times they do not see or have access to their HCPs really easily. Some patients have access monthly, some patients by quarter. So this is difficult for not having a source of really good and reliable information. Caregivers are not often considered in the equation of rare disease impact. So although we have a mom that have to dedicate herself to a child, the government or the public policies are not considering her as a part of the equation. It's difficult to geographically disseminate the knowledge on rare disease. And also we have, together with this problem, we have the low experience in rare disease of some institutions. So I talk a lot about access or accessing the medication, accessing diagnosis, but we should kind of, as pharma in Latin America and in other regions of the world, we have to move like of the concept of access to the concept of accessibility. Why is that? Because it's not only about the drug, it's about care, it's about the diagnostic, it's about information, it's about how to assess something besides the treatment, and how do we can kind of bring this to the table and become those things easy to obtain, able to reach or to enter a place or to reach a patient, easily to understood, easily to be appreciated. And also, how can we and payers be more inclusive on hearing patients and families to act on those kind of feedbacks that we commonly receive from them, but it is difficult to act in a way that we tailor a solution. And also with this hearing exercise, how can we co-create with them instead of just hearing, of just trying to reach something without them included on this equation as well. So I will just showcase a little two examples in Latin America, one in Colombia and one in Brazil for the same disease state. It is a disease state called HPP, hypophosphatasia. So we have a challenge in Colombia that it was raising awareness to this disease. It's not considered a rare disease, but a ultra rare disease. We aim to build a public policy in this new complex environment and to improve and build knowledge around this disease, and not talking about only internally, but externally as well. So what we did there, we bring to the table the medical society and the patient advocacy group in Colombia that support HPP patients. And actually the idea comes from them. We just support them on giving out the fine tune of the idea. And this would be great because it would be the first data generation for this disease in Latin America. So the patient association together with the medical society decided to do a survey of quality of life in Colombia with the patient supported by the patient group. So this would generate Latin America HPP scientific data, and it will become possible for us as a company to reassess HPP patient journey to see if we are kind of moving forward in the right way, or if we have to adapt and hear back patients and co-create with them, as I just said. And the benefits to the patients would be to evaluate the data and deliver better services, better understand patients and family burden before and after treatment, and understand how the real-world evidence would be used to create public policies, to connect the patients across the country, and to disseminate info outside Colombia. And this would be kind of finalized in Q2 this year, if I'm not wrong here. But we are really excited of working together with the patient advocacy organization and with the Genetic Medical Society in that. The last showcase is the one that we did in the last October in Brazil. We have a huge challenge with HPP in Brazil, talking about disseminating the importance of the multidisciplinary care, understand the size of the HPP population that needs support, raising awareness, also elevating the voice of patients to their HCPs, because most of the times patients do not feel heard about the urgency of treating or of receiving the treatment. So sometimes patients speak with their physician. Okay, I feel like I'm I get into a point there, I really need the therapy. And from where we hear, most of the times patients do not feel heard about their physicians. So we partner with an umbrella organization in Brazil. We enhance their knowledge around HPP, also about the scenario of HPP in other countries, such as Colombia, such as Canada, such as US, we facilitate their connection with patient advocacy groups of Colombia and US. And we build a whole week of delivering reliable information, not only to patients, but also to HCPs. But this comes from our relationship with a patient advocacy group, not from a medical society. So this is the good part of it. They also linked to the Genetic Medical Society and to the Odontology Society in Brazil to throw more webinars on that week. So it was a huge success. We reached so many patients and kind of give us the idea of where we are in about HPP in Brazil. So the benefits of it was that the HCPs become more aware about the patient needs. We disseminate reliable information. We involve other HCPs, like besides physician, as I said, like dentists and some other professionals. We foster the movement of globalization of the patient advocacy groups, and we enable a local patient advocacy group to discuss solutions that come outside the country. So in Resume Patient Advocacy at Alexion, we are responsible to ensure that the voice of patients are heard, not only about one specific department or other, but within all the Alexion. We are currently driving from a paradigm of shifting from a reactive validation of the things that we do, from a co-creation of the things that we do. This will bring a competitive advantage for us. We are close to mainly of patient groups in rare disease in Latin America. This gives us the ability of generating more value for patients. And our relationships is based not on external investments, but by trust and long-term partnership with them. And this is highly important. We value, recognize, and respect the way that patient advocacy groups support and relate to their patients. And this is me. Thank you all, and I'm here for any question.
Thank you, Emerson.
Thank you.
The best line of your thing was saying that access should be called accessible. It has to be accessible, not just giving access to a treatment. Because what you said, with 8 hours to drive just to get an infusion, and infusions take all day as well. So you must have had to leave a day before, and that is absolutely ridiculous. So I definitely love that sentiment that it has to be accessible. You have to be able to reach it and get the care that you need. Because also the challenges are really similar, aren't they? Everyone in the rare disease community struggles with access to treatment, access to care, and just the logistics of it. Doesn't really matter where you are in the world because it hasn't really been perfected yet. So,
exactly.
Oh, yeah, it was so good. And I could talk to you all day about this. But I'm gonna bring in Renata and Juan because they're our last two speakers. And then if you guys want to stick around, we're going to do questions at the end. I have a billion questions for everybody because it was just so rich and just insights. So with that, I'll give it to Renata and Juan. And enjoy, guys. This is our last speakers with us.
Juan, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start. I'm feeling very honored to be part of this meeting. Me as a physician, and I'm really a privilege to share with you my experience. So I have 15 minutes to go through our experience. I live in Rio de Janeiro. So I'll share my slides and make things a little bit easier. So I live in Rio, and I'm a coordinator as a physician. My specialty, I'm a medical geneticist. So as a medical geneticist, probably I work all my professional life with the rare diseases. So in this presentation, I want to show you an experience, in a way, as a national experience in Brazil regarding rare diseases and access of these patients initially to be diagnosed. And from there on, many things can happen. So welcome to Brazil. Brazil is, as was shown previously, it's in South America. It's the only country in South America that speaks Portuguese, because we were colonized by the Portuguese, in contrast with the other countries that are Spanish speak. We have a population of 231 million people in the country, divided in 5 regions. So we are the 12th economy of the world. However, if we see the Human Development Index clearly shows the inequalities in our country. We are the 84th in this list of countries. And not only inequalities on each region, but among regions, and very much depends where you live in the country. So these are the patients we need to take care of, patients with a rare disease. And we use this rare disease prevalence that is the same that the Health Organization uses, is 16.5 individuals over 100,000 people. And based on these numbers, as you probably are much more familiar than myself, it was done in Europe, was done a survey of rare diseases regarding genetic aspects on 8 rare diseases. And there are many, many drawbacks, as you all know. Like 25% of the patients had the diagnosis from first symptoms to diagnosis, we could reach 30 years of gap. 40% of patients first receive an incorrect diagnosis. 25% of patients traveled to a different region to obtain confirmation of their diagnosis. The genetic nature of the disease was not communicated to the family in 25% of cases, and genetic counseling was only performing around 50% of the cases. So it was, as Emerson told you, important landmark in the country was 2014. From a national perspective, our Ministry of Health put out some guidelines to anyone that has fulfilled many prerequisites to become a reference center in rare diseases. So, and then, as you all know, 80 to 85% of the rare diseases has a genetic etiology. And being so, you need to have genetic counseling because of the recurrence and inheritance of some of these diseases. So this particular guideline is centered in the physician, medical geneticist, and for one only reason, here in our country, who has a former professional knowledge to be a medical geneticist and to perform genetic counseling, or the physicians and the medical counseling. Different from other countries, as UK, you can have nurses doing genetic counseling, going through a professional, proper information.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Juan. We can only see your starting slide. I don't know if the screen share is working correctly or if you need to step through, but just wondered if you could progress your slides or just have a look at the screen share for us.
Mm-hmm. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we've just seen the same thing. I wonder if the wrong screen's been shared. Would you mind just disabling and re-enabling your screen share? Thank you so much. That's working perfectly now, Juan. Sorry, and thank you for that.
No, I apologize for that. I just had a blackout where I was to have my presentation. I had to run to the neighbor to find a working email or internet. So as I showed you, these are the patients we are taking care. We use the prevalence of the World Health Organization at 65 patients over 100,000 individuals. These are the informations regarding the drawbacks among this elder rare disease survey that was done, if I'm not wrong, in 2019, related to 8 rare diseases. And we used the similar prevalence numbers in these guidelines that were put out from our Ministry of Health to organize these reference centers. 80 to 85% of these diseases has a genetic background or influenced by genetic factors. So genetic counseling is imperative in all families that has a proper diagnosis. And this particular guideline it's all drawn around the medical geneticists, because in our country, only formally speaking, the medical geneticists are properly trained to do genetic counseling through their years of training. So we have 2 groups of rare diseases. The ones that is related to autoimmune disorders, infectious diseases, and so on. They are not in this particular group that I'll be showing you. We are organized, and we have the formalities, the whole formalities to become this reference center to congenital anomalies, intellectual disability, and inborn errors of metabolism. So back in 2002, we did this survey regarding all medical genetic service, clinical and laboratory genetic service. And as you can see, most of the services are in the urban area of the country. So, and as well, all the intellectual property, all the research was being performed more or less in the same locations of the genetic center, and is where is located most of the university hospitals as well. So Brazil has a national health system, is a constitutional right for health and education. So if we see our organization, and this map shows the basic hospital reference all around the country to children less than 5 years, and we can see very much the superposition with what I showed you previously. So this is very interesting because working with the primary care and going through the different levels of medical service, the country has already organized one particular system that works, has a very, very strong capillarity. I must say that we have a counterpart. We have a very strong private sector in the country regarding health. But in terms of rare diseases, and that's my opinion, we need to work as a national organization in different levels, depending on the region you are. So in 2019, our Ministry of Health, through a very important grant, organized a rare disease network. And we are really doing a huge survey through 33 medical centers that sees patients with a rare disease. Among them, we have 17 reference centers that is shown here in the map. That is more or less the same that we are organized in the state of Rio. So this is our group in 2019, all health professionals in all levels of medical genetics, biomedics, genomics, bioinformatics, and so on. And so we start working with some instruments to design processes regarding the reference and counter-reference for patients with rare diseases that would come from the primary care health system. So we could design the suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, customers, and it's called SIPOC instrument. It's one particular instrument for management. And at the same time, we need to make agreements, and there is more political agreements than really a health agreement with the national, with the state, and the municipality of Rio de Janeiro. And there's one reason for that, because each patient we see, we receive one particular sum for that particular patient. So putting in dollars, one individual that is born, for example, with a gastroschisis, for example, omphalocele, or a congenital cardiopathy, we receive $139 per consultation and 3 consultations per year. So doing that, and as a paradox, in 2020, we saw around 1,470 patients in these 3 categories. That means we could have a budget of around $204,000 only for the reference center. And that's very important because we can bring many internal processes and bring knowledge to the individualized medicine for these patients. They are, most of them don't have a private health insurance, so they depends on the national health system. So we could capitalize in our diagnostic technology. So through all the technology that you all are aware, the CGH array, the new generation sequencing, and so on. So I'll give you an example for patients that came in because of short stature. So all of them had a precise diagnosis, genetic diagnosis, and you all know how important it is, a precise diagnosis of that particular disease. And we never underestimate knowledge with anyone. So as has been shown previously with the other talks, we really talk head by head with the families, and we really give them empowerment of the knowledge of that particular disease, and they become very knowledgeable of that particular rare disorder. So we don't work by ourselves. In Rio de Janeiro, there is what is called the Alliance Rare Rio. They put together 37 patients organizations comprising 48 diseases. So I will give you an example how we work. And obviously, I've been working with the patient advocate group for many, many years. We bring these associations inside the hospital, and we discuss all the subjects you've been presenting until now. So I'll give you an example of how we worked in the past 2 years. And this is an association that works together with the very small people, what they call in the translation of it to Portuguese, they are the dwarfs. And mostly we were interested in achondroplasia. So we through biomarine pharmaceutical, they were interested to do a quality of life or lifetime impact study in achondroplasia. They selected 4 sites in Latin America, 2 in Brazil, 1 in Colombia, another in Argentina. And we went through many questionnaires of quality of life, impact of disease, use of health service, socioeconomic impact, and psychosocial impact. So the idea of working together with the patient advocate group, and it has been shown brilliantly from all speakers that that talked until now, they are excellent partners because they can bring new ideas for us that are very objective and very technical, pragmatic in our thoughts. So I put together the group of the association, and I explained for them what were the aim. And obviously, we are not naive of the interest of biomarine in this perspective, especially now that we have a new medicine for achondroplasia. But we put the interests together, and this particular moment was with the association. We explained to them what were our aims. We had already the physicians and the two motor physiotherapists that helped me with the project. And we brought, as a paradox, in the peak of the pandemic in 2020, 51 achondroplasia patients, all of them over 3 years of age. Doing so, we start our achondroplasia cohort with the young ones, that it's extremely important to understand the natural history of these diseases, because they have many, many complications and comorbidities associated, okay? So obviously the genetic counseling was one of the objectives on the familial cases and on non-familial cases. And the other part of the tripod is the industry. And the industry many, many times help us, especially coming from a country like Brazil, to optimize resources. And I'm showing you two papers that were published last year and this year. This one, they brought together all experts in the world in achondroplasia, and we did an international consensus statement. And among these authors, we had Inês Alves. She is the president of the Portuguese Achondroplasia Association. On the other hand, we bring here the medical affairs group from Biomarine Pharmaceutical, and as well bringing the 4 PIs of this particular project, and we could make a statement, in this case, an impact of achondroplasia in Latin America patients. So all resources come into discussion, and we put the same aim, is to bring health to patients and quality of life to patients with rare diseases. And finally, doing so, we bring the most important aspect that I see from a very personal perspective. We take care of the health, we take care of the organization of patients, of the access, of the structure, national infrastructure, and so on. But we have to change the environments. Is where the aim. I don't need to have a patient or a son or a daughter with one particular rare disease to have awareness of the importance of the whole. And doing so, we bring all these experience. For example, this particular patient paper that brought exactly the experience of the environment towards the achondroplasia patient, or this, what is probably you all know about it, the Zero Project report, is a United Nations international community working with all these innovative practices regarding accessibility, okay? So just to show you some examples of things we talk with the patients regarding all these questions of accessibility, of putting an environment to diminish the risk of accidents and so on, that is in their homes, that is in the school, in the environments, and obviously we working together, for sure we can aim a better day for the patient with a rare disease. With that, I finish you, and obrigado. That means thank you in Portuguese.
Oh, brilliant. You made so many excellent points and very insightful too. You're actually, I don't know if you know this, but you're actually working with the MCDS therapy team people in our international consortium on skeletal dysplasia research. So Rick and I were like fascinated, and they actually have an exhibition booth that people can visit, and they're speaking tomorrow in the Road to Access and Treatment. So thank you so much, Juan. That was really fun. And then I'm gonna let Renata go, and then we should have some time for questions. So thank you guys so much for hanging in there. I love this because it's late at night and I think it's so fun. So thank you.
Thank you, Blaine. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for having me here. It's an honor to take part in this great initiative. I also would like to say thank you to Emerson and Juan, who have spoken a little bit of the Latin American context, and I'm going to share with you my slides. And I hope that I can go a little bit on the point where I want to share with you, because I guess most of what I wanted to say is been said before. So when we think about Brazil, first of all, we need to understand not only the continental size of the country, but the amount of people that we are taking care through consider one of the biggest universal public system in the world, considering it's public, universal, and also based on some principles as integrality. So the idea is that we need to provide free access to health to all the Brazilian people, but also visitors, foreigners, and to all kinds of health services, including hospitals, exams, diagnosis, and also technologies. So it's a huge challenge. And of course, it has its impact not only to rare diseases, but to provide the quality healthcare we desire to our people. As it's been said, 25% of Brazilians have access to private services, to private agreements, but they are also able to access the public services. So
Renata, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. I don't think your screen share is working. Would you like me to share your slides for you?
Yes, please.
I will sort that. If you want to stop share, and I'll get yours
Yes,
up. Okay, is that working for everybody? And what slide? What slide would you like to be at, Renata?
The third one, I guess.
Here.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes. So, as I said, it's a huge challenge to provide quality healthcare to all the Brazilian and the visitors population. But we also have been discussing some different initiatives for different areas of health, including rare disease. And as Juan has said, we have a new ordinance. It's considered new because it's the first one that tries to organize the health system for rare disease patients. So this is an important initiative, but it's been said before. And it's tried to maintain the principles as universality, integrality, equity, access to health, provide new guidelines, and especially timely access to diagnosis. Are you changing yes, you can go to the next one. So this is how this ordinance is provided. But two things about this new ordinance that was created using a lot of inputs from different stakeholders, considering the civil society, the industry, and some other important stakeholders in the health care area. So there are two things that I would like to highlight here. First is, as Emerson has said, we have this, we are trying to provide home care, considering not only 8 hours, but maybe days to have access to reference centers in Brazil. We have 75% of mothers that are the only ones that take care of children with rare diseases. So there is a burden now. So there is considered a social burden. And after the ordinance from 2014, the Brazilian system is providing efforts to give access to health in their homes, avoiding other burdens from the disease. but also we've been trying to strengthen the reference centers that Juan has mentioned. Although the ordinance is very focused on specialized treatment, we don't have enough reference centers. Since the ordinance, only 20 new reference centers was certified. And this is mainly because we don't have enough budget to certify the centers and also to transfer the financial incentive to these centers. So it's been a very long and bureaucratic process to guarantee that these reference centers that have lots of important conditions to receive the financial incentive to get access to financial incentives. Next, please. The other point, besides the ordinance, that I wanted to highlight is that we have a very organized path to new drugs in the country, to new technologies. It goes from the sanitary regulatory agents to specifying the new technologies and also to listing or incorporation these new technologies. And as you can see, considering the size and the ambitious aims of our public health systems, it's been every time more difficult to incorporate to the public system new technologies in rare diseases, because despite all the challenges that all you know, the difficulties to have good clinical trials with important outcomes, it always have a great impact in the system, budget impact. So this is something that we are struggling with. And from 2017 to nowadays, we are incorporating more technologies in rare diseases, mainly because of the participation of the civil society in the country, but also because the incorporation is being flexibilized as some of the requirements to the incorporation have been abandoned for a while, like because it's necessary to guarantee access to some of these technologies while some new evidences are gathered. This is very difficult, not only in Brazil, but also in development in countries that are well developed, because we don't have a patient registry. So we cannot follow what is happening with the patients to guarantee that one or the other technology is developing or is guaranteeing efficacy or effectiveness as it was promised when they was submitted to be listed. But what we've been doing is to guarantee the access to these new technologies while a few evidences are still necessary. So they are trying to do both at the same time. Next, please. So in this context, from 2019, we've been discussing risk-sharing agreements in the country for 10 years already. But since 2019, we decided to go further with risk-sharing agreements, which are mainly agreements where the payment for the new technology is only set after its use in real-world conditions, gathering real-world evidence. This is something that is not new. In the legal system, it's quite old, but in the health system, it's something very audacious. But it's been done in England, as you know, and in many different European countries. But in Brazil was a pilot project that was initiated for a rare condition, which is SMA. Next, please. So the initial recommendation of our agency was that nusinersen was not appropriate to be listed, mainly because there was no evidence of effectiveness, especially for all the types that is listed in the recommendation that was asked to be listed, and also because of budget impact. So the first recommendation was to deny access to nusinersen, to Spinraza in the country, considering the evidence of effectiveness and budget impact. Next, please. But after the company has proposed a risk-sharing agreement, and it has its importance because most of the access to this medicine was done via lawsuit. So we have in Brazil something that it's not common even for Latin American countries, that is a huge amount of medicines that are accessed through the lawsuit via. So it has another impact and consequences, both for patients, but for the health system too. So Quanitec, our agency for incorporation of new technology, has decided to start a pilot project to incorporate, to list nusinersen in a risk-sharing agreement. Next, please. These discussions about risk-sharing agreements, but most innovative agreements to guarantee access to new technologies, has gained more importance nowadays, especially with gene therapies, because of the budget impact, as you know, but also because of the doubts, the uncertainties around development and safety, especially considering outcomes for long terms. So risk-sharing agreement was tried from 2019, and what happened actually was that this experience has failed for a few reasons. One is that we didn't have an institutional process to guarantee when and how we would use new agreements to provide access to high-cost therapies for rare diseases or other diseases. The other point was that, as you know, rare diseases have different and multiple forms of access of the development of the patient and its clinical conditions. It's really difficult to guarantee that it's the medicine itself that provides an improvement of quality of life or any measure or any outcome that we could choose to establish an agreement that has in its center the price, the final price of the new technology. Also, we have been trying to gather data from patients, but considering the lack of investment and also the initiative of the industry to try to get together with the Ministry of Health now, it's not something old, it's something very new to get the public and the private areas and actors and stakeholders together around a program of access. So we don't have the capacity nowadays to gather the data that is necessary to point in the end what is the price, the final price of new technologies. So what we have, you can next please. What we have is, this is the last comment, what we end up having was a coverage with evidence development, which is the drug was listed and we didn't have means to evaluate, to assess the price, considering its real value to the patient. And we end up having a experimental incorporation or an incorporation with evidence development. But what I said is that those called innovative agreements are now trying to be discussed, and it's an important discussion nowadays to provide access because of the new gene therapy. So they are bringing back the discussion on price and value for the patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renata. Another brilliant presentation and a great way to end it. It really wrapped up everything. So thank you for that. And then probably wrapping it up now, I guess. So thank you to our brilliant speakers. This was a heck of a session. So thank you for all the time and effort you put into it. And thank you to our attendees for allowing us to go a little bit over. I hope you have either a frozen pizza in the oven or something so you can just pop and do that. But thank you so much. It was honestly my pleasure to host this and to speak to all my Americans I miss. So thank you very much. Have a great night, and then I'll see you tomorrow. Sorry, guys, a little bit. If you're in the UK, you're rising and shining there. It starts at 8 a.m. And we're covering, so we went from the Americas, and now we're going to go to the Asian Pacific region. So be up early, shower, and we will see you in quite an early turnaround. But thank you guys again for everything.